You all are about to listen to the very first uncovered Zoom interview with an incredibly inspiring man, Bryan West, who has a story of walking out of the shame of alcoholism that subsequently led him to a DUI and spending several nights in jail. My hope is that Bryan's story will be just yet another reminder that we all struggle. We all do, and our struggles look different, but whatever yours is, it doesn't have to be anything that defines you. You can overcome it, find healing, and live your best life. And Bryan's a testament to that. This will feel a little bit more like a podcast probably because it's just under an hour. So put your headphones in, listen in the car, listen while you're running or on a walk. My hope is that you share it and you help me spread the word what I'm trying to do with Uncovered. If you know anyone or if you yourself have a story of shame or you have found healing, you've walked through it, you're on the other side, you can tell people why it's better, please reach out to me. Or maybe you've never shared your story and you're terrified, but you feel ready and you need a place to share it anonymously. We can do that here. So reach out if you have any questions about that. But without further ado, here is the first uncovered long form interview with Bryan West. Bryan, thank you so much for joining me today to talk about shame. You have an incredible story of overcoming alcoholism, addiction, battling mental health issues like depression, thoughts of suicide and anxiety. And so I'm just so thankful you're here today to share openly and courageously with us. So let's just kind of take us back to the beginning. I'll give people the nitty gritty details. You were charged with a DUI in 2018 and found yourself in a jail cell. And for someone who's a Northwestern graduate, worked on TV as a news anchor and reporter, that is just not ever something I know. Because I went to college with you, so a little disclaimer, we went to Gonzaga University together as well. But I know that I know you and you're this light to be around and a good person. And I never would have thought Bryan West is going to end up in a jail cell someday. And I know that that's very much how you felt too. So kind of take us back to that part of your life and how you got there.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I always start whenever I do interviews or talking by saying I'm not a victim. I'm really not. Like, I created victims through my addiction to alcohol. So 2 years ago, I had a bad breakup. I had an article written about me that was false, and I just sunk into a deep depression. And I didn't know how to combat it because when I would show up for work, I was a morning reporter for the NBC. I normally did fun stories. Like, I ate a scorpion, I shot off of an inflatable slide. I just liked bringing light and joy to people's living rooms every day. And so what people didn't know and what really shocked them is as soon as my shift ended, I went back to my apartment and I couldn't just get past depression and feeling alone. And there was a gas station nearby where they would sell 3 bottles of wine for $10. And so almost daily I would buy 3 bottles of wine and almost daily I would drink 2. And so that was not a sustainable life. And eventually it was going to come to a halt. And what I realized is even though that was happening to me, I thought my depression that I can take all of the pain and I can hold all of this in. I don't need to ask for help. I don't need to burden somebody else. Not realizing that all of that would eventually lead to a moment that would maybe impact or hurt somebody else. So I was on my couch. I was actually supposed to go to New York 2 days later to shoot a Today Show segment. And I had finished 3 bottles of wine this night. And I was talking to my assistant news director and some friends on the phone. And when I came to, the next thing I remember was being in the back of a cop car. And that was crazy. Like you said, I've gone to Northwestern, I got straight A's. Like, I've always tried to do the right thing. And here I am in the back of a cop car. And anybody who's been drunk or remembering or coming to, you start hoping it's a dream or a nightmare. So in that moment, that's all I thought is like, this has to be a bad dream. This can't be real. Like, what is even going on? What is happening? Where's my phone? I didn't know who to call or what to do. And I realized that my 8 months of continually drinking after the job finally caught up with me. That night in the jail cell, I thought about 2 options. I thought my reputation's ruined. I am done. Everything I built up for 30 years of my life was completely demolished. so I could kill myself. And that was a very real thought as I was coming to in the cell. And the other thought was, I heard a voice and it said, what if you just climbed out from rock bottom? So the next day I checked into rehab. I went for 37 days in-house, worked with a lot of counselors, found the root of what made me so sad and my loneliness. And I decided from that moment just to move onward and upward. And that is a slogan and a phrase that I've used a lot of, is just, if you hit a rock bottom, just keep moving forward. What was lucky for me is I didn't hurt somebody. So I had driven across the street to a McDonald's in my drunken stupor. And then I was driving back across the street when a cop thankfully saw me and pulled me over. I'm very grateful for that night. That sounds like a weird, dark thing to say, but nobody got hurt, which is incredible. And it was a huge wake-up call for me to get help. What I also always say, in addition to not being a victim, is it shouldn't have taken that moment. Like, I knew for months I had a problem and I should have reached out for help. I don't think I knew how to take the next step. So,
well, you wrote a beautiful essay and it's on your website if people want to read it. I really encourage people to go and read it because you write in such vivid detail. But you talk about, you'd been drinking for 8 months since that breakup. Did you know even before the breakup that you had problems with depression and anxiety? Like, at what point in your life did you realize, like, gosh, I think I might have some problems with depression and anxiety and I might, maybe I should get help for this?
I would say I might have known. Like, there were definitely moments in college that I got incredibly drunk, but I thought it was just part of being in college. Or when I was a young 20-year-old, like, it was just a part of moving and transitioning and being in the business of news. And I think what I did is I kept enabling myself. But looking back, even at rehab, is just, there were so many signs. So what I always tell people when they try to relate to the story is they want to say, like, oh, I only have 2 glasses of wine with dinner. And I always tell them, but you're not me. 1 in 20 people suffer from addiction. So when I have one drink, I can't stop the obsession in my mind that says, just keep going. And the more drunk you get, the more your walls come down, the more your common sense goes away for somebody who has addiction. So for me, there's a phrase that I love. It's 1 drink is too many and 1,000 are never enough. And that's so true. Like, as soon as I have 1 drink, I just keep going. And so when I was in rehab, they force you to look back at your life. They force you to look back at all the decisions that you've made, all of the moments that might have been dark. They force you to look at it from the perspective of your parents, of people you've dated, of your friends, of your family. And they really just force you to say, like, this is all happening. Here's where your story is. If you continue to drink, it's going to get worse. So I was very fortunate and lucky that I didn't hurt somebody. But that's what terrifies me from ever picking up again, is that I don't know or want that to ever get worse. I've always wanted to be someone that brings light to dark places. I always think, how can I leave the world a little bit better? Or how can I leave a place that I'm visiting a little bit better? And drinking only leads, for me as an addict, to a dark place.
So do you not recognize in yourself feelings of struggling with depression and anxiety, like in high school or when you were younger? Like, was it really the alcohol that kind of took you there?
I think the alcohol really propelled it, but I have always kind of struggled with depression. I love journals. I actually journal ever since the DUI happened. I journal almost every day because it's good mile markers to see where I was at. And I always say, like, 2 years ago, even trying to figure out what's going to happen in court, what's going to happen with my job, when there was so much uncertainty. Now it's like we have a whole new problem. What's going to happen with COVID? So I journal every day, and I was looking back at my childhood journals, and I didn't realize that every single year I would fill out 1 journal page for 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade, and 10th grade. So I had 7 pages in this one journal, and they all talked about possibly killing myself or that I was depressed. And that was even crazy to me to think. And friends who now have kids, I'm like, this started when I was 10 years old.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that was my question in reading your article or your essay too, is you clearly struggled with mental health a little bit and thoughts of suicide. Was the stigma around those things, like, do you think if there hadn't been a stigma that you wouldn't have gotten to this point? Like, if we lived in a society where it was easy to just say, hey, I'm struggling with this, do you think it would have prevented you from getting to this point of rock bottom? Because you said something in your article, which is that some people knew you had a problem, but most people didn't even realize the extent. You knew you had a problem. You knew you needed help, but you cared more about what people thought of you. And to me, that is the voice of shame. Shame is this emotion that we experience socially. It's how we're afraid of what other people, how they're going to perceive our worthiness, and it keeps us silent. And so I guess, do you feel like it was the shame first of, I can't tell people I'm having these thoughts of suicide, or I can't tell people that I'm feeling sad? Was there shame for that first, and then you got to rock bottom?
I think that was covered by, I'm also really openly gay, and I grew up in a conservative town in Nevada. And I think there was more mentality around that, and I was afraid to be myself or like talk about it because it's hard to relate to somebody. There's still a large population that think it's a choice. And for me, I always said, why would this be a choice? Like, why would I actively choose to be something that a lot of people didn't like? What I've loved is there has been more awareness around that. But as soon as I came out of the closet, I emceed Pride, I was kind of a voice here in Phoenix for the LGBTQ community. Then it started to realize, well, you're also an addict. Like, you have an addiction and a problem with alcohol. And so I think at that moment, it was, well, I'm put together and people find me inspirational and I do fun stories and they say they enjoy watching me. How can I also tell them that I have a problem? With that, though, it's still 100% my fault. I believe that I knew I had it. I knew there were resources. And I was the one who was saying, like, I was afraid. And that's why when everything happened, I made an oath to myself that I would share my story. A lot of coworkers said, why would you ever share the mugshot? Why would you ever tell people about it? Why would you post this on Facebook? This is going to live with you forever. And I always said to them, well, it's already living with me. And if I can help somebody else, I'd rather change my mental frame, that is much more important than what somebody else thinks of me. And that also keeps me sober and true to myself.
Yeah, I think for me too, I've experienced this in overcoming my own eating disorder, and which felt like an addiction, is that when you can turn your pain into purpose, not only does it keep you, I guess not only does it add purpose to your life, but for me, it also keeps me in this space of healing and wholeness where I know I'm not going back there, because helping people be pulled out of that pit is so much greater than any satisfaction or immediate instant gratification I could get from going back to my addiction. So how has your pain turned into purpose, I guess?
So when I first published the essay, there was an overwhelming outpouring of support. And that was really incredible, that you could just kind of be yourself. And you could say, hey, I failed. I really failed at life and I did not get help, but here's how I'm overcoming it. Here's how I want to be remembered. And so it's been really amazing to have people reach out. I had moms who reached out who said, because of my essay, they checked their son into rehab, or their son wanted to go into rehab. I've had friends that have said, I may have a problem as well. Thank you for being so open and kind of showing me that there is a life. I really think deep down, if you have a problem with alcohol. It's not normal to get blackout drunk every time you go out. It's not normal to get drunk 5 days a week, 6 days a week and try and recover. It's not normal to have hangovers, like 5 hangovers every week that last 3 hours. That's just not normal. I had convinced myself that it was. I was surrounded by other people who live that way. And so by just sharing my story, I hope that other people realize if you want to get help, you can. It's up to you. The choice to recovery really is up to a person, but there is life after recovery. There is purpose. My life has gotten so much better. For the first time, I started praying to God 2 years ago. I have a better faith relationship. I've noticed my life has gotten better. I've lost 20 pounds. Like, I have better relationships with my family, with my friends. And I just try and be as authentic as I can, just showing, like, when I do have a bad day, I try and post that on Instagram or share on Onward and Upward, like, hey, I'm also struggling. Because I think it's really important for people to see not only the positives and the successes, but that this is reoccurring. And that's a common question I get all the time is, well, you've been sober 2 years, you're fine, you're good. And the way that I relate that is I say, well, you've been to the gym for 2 years, so you're good physically, like, you're great. It's constantly a struggle every day, even watching TV shows. But every day I wake up and I say, can I get through 24 hours without drinking? And then I wake up tomorrow and I do the same thing. And when you look at life just taking it one day at a time, especially if you're going through a personal hell or something really hard, it makes it so much easier. If you look at it my whole lifetime, I'm never going to drink again, that gets really daunting and that can be really heavy. Like, how can I do this for 50 years? But if I just take it every day and wake up and say, I want to make a difference today. I want to bring light to dark places. I want to move onward and upward. What can I do today?
Well, that's such a great point. I think that even after you find healing and recovery, there is almost this pressure, whether it's societal or we put it on ourselves, that says, well, now I have to be perfect. Now I've made it to this place of healing, so I should have all the answers, right? And that's a lie. It is a daily struggle, and you have to be willing to be open and honest with yourself. And one of the things you mentioned in your essay was how you had used alcohol to kind of numb all your feelings. And I've recently read Glennon Doyle's book, Love Warrior. I'm not sure if you've read that. And then also Untamed. And what I love about what she says in her book is there's this lie that we believe that a good life means that you're just happy all the time, that you reach happiness and that it's just easy to be happy. And so a lot of people find themselves feeling like, what the heck? Like, why aren't I happy? And she says, no. The point of life is to experience and feel and sit with all of our emotions, and that it's going to be really hard and there's going to be a lot of pain, but you have to feel the pain just as much as you feel the happiness. And so has it gotten easier for you to feel, to sit with your emotions? And do you find yourself more observing yourself from a point of like, oh, I'm feeling this? So explain how that's changed your ability to feel.
100%. So with emotions, if I'm having a bad day and I just want to reset, there's some days I get out of bed and I'm like, no, can we just go back to sleep and restart? You have 20 emails, your boss calls you, like maybe you won't go through a breakup or a fight occurs. So what I have found is, what do I need to do today to keep myself sane and sober? And I heard this from somebody else who was in recovery, had 33 years, and it really has stuck with me. You should put yourself always first as far as being healthy, because it makes you a better husband, because it makes you a better dad. If you're always putting others' needs or what they think about you before yourself, it's diminishing that, and you can't be the best person to them. So what I find is, if I'm having an argument or something's happening, how can I feel this emotion, but how can I also clean my side of the street as soon as the destruction's gone? So even with friends or family, if we get in a fight or a disagreement, usually take a moment, go for a run, and then I'll call back and say, I'm really sorry for what I said. How can we move forward? And that's been really important. Also, just like, if I want to cry, just cry. Like, just feel everything. Like, take that moment, validate that your feelings are real. And a lot of times I will say your problems are not that special, and there are crazier, worse, more horrible problems in the world. So what I have to be conscious of is feeling my emotions, but also not invalidating them. Meaning, I know COVID's going on, I know people are dealing with deaths. I need to also realize that what's happening with me is valid and take care of myself in that moment.
Well, that brings me to self-love. You know, you talk about spirituality, finding God, loving yourself. These are all things that I also experienced having, and I feel like they're universal experiences that happen for people when they walk out of shame. For me, it was, oh my gosh, I love myself and God loves me no matter what. Like, there's nothing I could do to earn the worthiness of being a living human. Like, I'm already as worthy as I'm going to get. So can you explain what your aha moments were? Because I know you probably had them, just finding that love for yourself and love from God.
There's a really good book. It's called Return to Love by Marianne Williamson. I got that as soon as I was out of rehab. A friend had recommended it, and it talks about that, like returning to self-love. How do you find a way to build your worth back, your confidence back? And that's one of my favorite books. And the biggest thing with it that it said is, when there's a house, sometimes we think we have these tiny chips of paint. Sometimes we think a window's cracked and we need to fix it, when really we need to actually demolish it and just rebuild again. Like, we really need to look at the foundation, like that Maren Morris song. The bones are good, the crack, what is it? The bones are good, the rest don't matter.
Yeah.
And that's just what I found. I also discovered hiking. I love to hike. I love to go out and be in nature. That's actually where I feel closer to faith, or the closest to faith, is kind of climbing my own summit and challenging myself. I hate bees, I hate heights, but I said, you know what, I feel alive doing this, especially in Arizona. And it was when I started to lose weight and when I started to get faster going up the mountains that I was like, oh my gosh, I am really great. Like, why did it take me 30 years to realize that, like, I do love myself? And why do I have shame when I admit that? There is a very fine line, but there is a line between being arrogant and just having pride in who you are. And I think it's important to, like, show people you should be proud of who you are. We only have one life, we only have one body, and the faster we can make peace with that, the better off our lives will be. And it took me 30 years to realize that. So right now I work for a media company that works with high school students. And whenever I coach them, the biggest thing I say is, everyone close your eyes. Raise your hand if you've ever wanted to be someone else. Now open your eyes. And just remember back in high school how much you wanted to be the popular guy or the girl. They also raise their hand. Like, every single person at one point wishes they were a celebrity or an athlete or maybe a politician. They all wish that they were somebody else. And once you move past that, realize, like, there's nothing I can do. I'm literally in this body. I just have this mind. Here's the hand, like the cards that I was dealt. I just need to love who I am and move past it.
Yeah, and I think it is such a powerful moment when you realize that, because it's like, there has never been and will never be another you. No one else has your set of gifts and experiences with your story. So go be the best version of you, because I think the ultimate tragedy is to get to your deathbed and realize you didn't take a chance on yourself, that you didn't love yourself enough to actually say, you know what, I'm worthy of this crazy dream or this desire that I've had forever. I think so often we hold ourselves back because we don't love ourselves. We don't feel worthy of our dreams or the desires of our heart. And we live small, scared, waiting for someone else to give us permission to be who we're supposed to be. And that's something that I really realized, is I lived my life waiting for permission for someone else to recognize in me what I wanted to see in myself. Does that resonate with you?
100%.
So I want to go back to, you got your DUI, you spent a night in jail, they released you. You went to rehab, and then when your hearing came, they dropped the charges from a felony to a misdemeanor for an extreme DUI. You then had to serve 9 days in jail. And you talk about that so, like I said, vividly in the essay. And can you just kind of take us back there and share some of the aha moments that you had? I mean, I know you struggled with thoughts of suicide, but you also were able to start to see some beauty in those 9 days that you even said, had this happened to me a year before, I would have been sitting in a cell, pissed off, feeling like a victim, and just ready for another drink. So talk about those beautiful moments kind of that you started to have, like your turnaround point there.
So when I was in high school and college, all I can say, even on the news and covering so many stories, nothing in my life could have prepared me to going to jail. I remember when I was walking in, there was a guard next to me, and I said, any advice, kind of pleading? And she said, keep your head down. And the doors opened, and I just remember getting like goosebumps and being terrified. And the first thing I was asked as soon as I walked in is a guy came up and said, what race are you? I have never, ever experienced something like that. And I said, well, I'm white. And that felt really weird to say. And he goes, great, here's the gang you're in. They read me a list of rules. They said, here's a bar of soap, and here's your bunk. And my experience was much different than what people picture in jail. You think you get one cellmate. I was in an open warehouse with 200 to 300. All mixed, felonies, misdemeanors. When I got to my cot, I talked to the guy next to me who was also on a cot, and I said, what are you in for? And he goes, I stabbed my sister. And that's where I was like, this is somebody who is laying next to me. That was really common, everything from taxes to DUIs. And that was just, how did we get here? The realization of that. So I stuck to my bunk. I did the 9 days while I was in there. And when I was coming out, it takes about 13 hours for them to process you out. And they move you to a cell with about 15 other guys. And we were sitting there, and the clothes come back from when you came in. I had surrendered as soon as my court case was resolved. I said, I want to go tomorrow. I just want to serve my time. I just want to get it over with. So I had pretty normal clothes going in. But you start to see the color of these guys that you've been in a cell with for 13 hours. They start to come back to life. Color is added to the room. And there was 2 kids that were in there, 18-year-olds, and they said, I can't wait to go out and drink again. And I remember looking at them, looking at my last 9 days of being scared and honestly paying for what I did, which I needed to do. And I remember thinking, I don't want to drink. And that's such a transformation for me in this moment is I don't want to go out and get drunk. And I looked at them and said, be careful, otherwise you're going to end up back here. And that was a moment of how far I had come. And that was really a prideful moment. And I remember when I got out, a friend picked me up, and I never looked back. It's a reminder every day. So anytime I ever slightly think like, maybe I've got it now, maybe I can have a glass of wine or champagne, I picture that night. I picture being in the back of the cop car. I try, after reading the police details, to imagine what it was like, as far as there were people that I encountered, there was a girl on a bicycle, and I just try and think about them. Like, this police officer was seeing me in my worst moment, and I probably ruined his night, but I'm so grateful that he saved me. And same with the other people. I think of them anytime I want to have a drink. I just think about them and go, it's not worth it, at least for me. And that's not anything on anyone who sees this. Like, we're all different. I'm just an addict who has trouble drinking. So the best solution is to never pick up a drink.
Mm-hmm. And have you had moments where you've come close, or do you feel like this feeling of finding yourself is really keeping you from ever even being tempted? Because I sometimes feel like my friends will be like, are you really good? Like, are you sure you're not struggling? And I appreciate their concern, but at the same time, I just have this never again type. Do you feel that I'm never going back to there? Or do you feel like, I don't know if I'm gonna, like, what's your confidence level like, I guess, in your sobriety?
I think as long as I keep doing everything that I'm supposed to, being honest, I think I'll be on a good path. We never use absolutes, or I never use absolutes that are like, I'll never drink again, because I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if there's a huge traumatic situation and then you find yourself in that. But what I do know is I've been very public about this as an added layer. Because if I was to relapse, I know a Facebook post would be coming. And that is an added layer of security. So I will never have this. Like, I don't feel 100% confident, but I do know today that I'm not going to pick up a drink. And like we had mentioned before, I know tomorrow I'll wake up and have the same mentality. But you never know where your life leads to. There was a story here in Phoenix about a woman on Thanksgiving whose husband and 3 kids were flying and flew into a mountain and died. She lost her entire family in a night. I do not know what that is like, nor do I hope I ever find out. But I don't know what situations are ahead. I just know I have built up enough layers to hopefully help me. I now know where to go get help. I know people to talk to if I need help. I now have resources. So you never say you're 100% confident, but I am in a place after 2 years with experiences that I feel like I know where I could find an answer.
That's really good. You mentioned that, well, you took a year off after going to jail. You put up that beautiful essay and said, I'm going to take a year off from my career in news to get sober. You're now, how far?
2 years.
2 years. Okay. So what was that year like for you?
It was amazing as far as the transformation, like just becoming a person, hiking, getting closer connections with friends and family. I mean, when you hit rock bottom, you know who's truly there for you. You know who truly supports you. And so it helped filter out, I guess, close connections in my life and let me know who is really with me. It also helped me to find self-love. But I was in a very fortunate situation where somebody who I've known for 15 years had a company and they had an opening. And my previous job, they actually said, you can come back. And I told them I didn't want to, because I knew that even 6 months of sobriety wasn't enough of a foundation for me to return to a stressful news environment. And I'm very gracious they let me out. We're still on great speaking terms. And I just needed to take that year. And now we're at 2 years to myself. And I do get asked a lot, like, will you ever come back? I think if the right position came, I would. But I am really grateful for everything that life has offered. I do have a good job right now. I love working with high school students. I love sharing my story. And I love to try and relate to people. Because no matter what, if you can't relate to my story because you don't struggle from addiction, you're still going to go through a personal hell. You're still going to have really tough news someday. We wake up and we don't know what is ahead. But when that happens, it's the same stuff. Take it one day at a time. Just get through the 24 hours.
Yeah, that's so good. I want to talk a little bit about spirituality, because I also was raised in a really conservative family. And for a while, I think when you're raised in very rigid Christian boundaries, you think you have like a connection with God. I don't know if you've experienced this. I guess I want to hear if you've had some transformation into how you see spirituality now, finding yourself, finding God, versus maybe how you were taught to feel it.
So growing up, I always believed in God, but I never thought that I was special enough for him. In a world of 8 billion people, I thought my problems aren't that special. Like, you should be helping others who are going through a difficult time. And I think that all came back to worthiness, not realizing that I did have worth. What I would say now is it took me 30 years to realize my connection with God or a higher power is different than everybody's. It's different than yours. It's different than my mom's. Just like our connection is different than what you have with your husband or your kids. Like, everyone's connection to God is different. And what was hard for me was sometimes in a church setting, even though I feel his presence and have faith in that, I didn't feel like I was close enough to him. So I found it when I was hiking. I found it when I was by the ocean. I find it when I pray every night. And the biggest thing with addiction is just realizing, even if you don't believe in God, is that there is something else out there that is more powerful than you. Because if you can believe in that, then you stop putting yourself as the most important person, or like your problems and holding them in or isolating. If you can just believe something else has more power that can help you, that's how it helps you stay sober. And all I can say is, since I started praying personally, again, my journey is different than everyone's. I've developed more of a faith, and I feel more confident. Like, I feel more of that self-love, and I feel more of a purpose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that connection. I think when you start to operate in a space where you are connected with spirit, and again, that can mean something different for everyone, but for me, it feels like you're in the present moment and you're tapped into the energy of what we all experience as humans. I mean, we are all connected, and we have an opportunity to be connected, I think, with literally every person that we encounter, but oftentimes we're too busy to even recognize that we just missed an opportunity that maybe would have been a life-changing moment for us. I'm kind of going back here, but I thought this was really cool, and I wanted to hear you talk about it, that you started to experience that answer to prayer in jail when you were reading that book that you said. What was it called?
The Grapes of Wrath.
Yes. So talk about that, because I thought that was so amazing. Like, your answer to prayer came in a book that was written decades before.
It's so crazy. So that was my second day. They had a small library, maybe 20 books. And one of them was The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. And I was like, well, at least this is going to last me the 9 days. And I had read that in high school, and I was bored with it in high school. What I didn't realize is the lead character had just gotten out of prison. And there were so many like answers to questions I had. I was constantly looking at the skylight. We had a skylight with no clock, so you would just see when it was day and night, and then you would count kind of the hours by meals, and we only got 2 meals a day. And so in the book, the lead character says, what I had to realize when I was in prison is stop counting the days and the hours and stop going over that in your head and just trying to be in the moment. But it was interesting to watch his transformation and what was going on during the Great Depression, that family's journey. And it also just instilled in me that your problems aren't that special. Like, here's a family in the Great Depression that lost everything and had to move across town. And they were just having the daily struggle of getting food. Like, that's all they needed, was just to put dinner on the table. All I had to do was just get through a night where I did have a cot. I was in an area just from the outside world, and I could make it through the 9 days. Who would have thought I would have found refuge in a John Steinbeck book, but.
Yes. I love that. You just had mentioned that so many of the prayers that you were praying would come in answers through like the next chapter you would read, which I just think is a beautiful thing. What are the voices of shame that you can now call out as like, nope, that's shame and that's a lie?
Sometimes when I think about applying back to news, instantly there's a voice in my head that says, think of all the comments you're going to get. Think of all the haters. Nobody wants to see you. Nobody thinks your story is inspirational. And instantly that's a moment when I realize that's just in my head. There may be those people, but I also think there would be a lot of people who would say, wow, your journey for 2 years and you've been outspoken is inspirational. That's something though that comes in my head instantly. And I have to really try and quiet that or talk about it with friends and family just to get it out of my system. Another voice that I hear is, I just watched Selling Sunset on Netflix, and when Kushal was going through a divorce and they talk about like doing a lot of drinking, it brings me back to moments when it's like, oh, if you have a hard day, just have a glass of wine. And that's a voice that I constantly like, no, I have to play out the tape. Because I will have one glass of wine, which will turn into the bottle, which will turn into 2 bottles, 3, and we don't know what's gonna happen post that. So that's another voice that instantly, if it's like, well, it's been 2 years, you're good, you got this, you can have a little champagne or Prosecco. I have to go, no, I personally cannot.
For me, I think there are just a lot of things that you wrote about that to me were like shame. First, you went into jail with a Superman shirt on. And even though you were drunk, you had the wherewithal to be like, I'm wearing a Superman shirt and being arrested for a DUI. And so what did you do?
So in that moment when they were taking the mugshot and I couldn't even look at the camera right before they did, I turned it around because I knew there would be an article just about it and I didn't want the irony. Like, here you are, somebody who brings light to people's living rooms on the news every morning, you're wearing a Superman shirt and you just got arrested for DUI. And so I thought about that in that moment and had switched it. And then I talked about it in the essay just to show like that could have been something a lot worse.
Yeah. And you explained too, you put up your mugshot and you had coworkers saying, why would you do that? Explain why you want people to see that and why you want that to be out there.
The mugshot to me is just a milestone of a rock bottom. I was in a horrible place. And anytime that I do think about drinking, I just look at the mugshot. And that may seem weird to people. They say that's going to be what people see when they Google you. I go, well, as long as there's a message attached to it about sobriety and my journey, I'm okay with that. Because if we just paint a pretty picture and show just like happy shots along with the story, it doesn't paint exactly what was happening. And it was important when I was on the news and as a reporter to tell the whole truth. And the whole truth is that picture was taken when I was in a horrible place of depression, of anxiety. And it's sad to look at. I don't want to go back there. And so I think it's really important to show how far I've come from that moment.
Yeah. Some of the other things that you said, obviously, what are people going to think of me? To me, that's the voice of shame as well. But also the idea that you're not alone, because I think what shame tells us is nobody else is this messed up. How could you possibly do this? You're so broken. What the heck is wrong with you? And I think it was towards the end where you just told people like, and this is something I think that you just mentioned from reading that book and realizing your problems aren't special, right? The idea that if you're struggling with something, it is impossible that you are the only human being who's ever experienced that. And that is your hope that you can get better. So I guess just talk a little bit about that. Just the realization of like, if someone else has overcome something really hard, I can figure out a way to overcome this too. And that should give hope to other people.
So it's a twofold. I share my story, one, to hopefully inspire people if they are in a dark place, go get help. Like, don't end up having a bad night where you do have law enforcement involved. And the other one is just to inspire people that it gets better. Like, just by sharing my story, it does get better. And I'm going to put myself out there to get criticized, so maybe it's easier for you. And I think that's really important. I've always wanted to be a dad. And I think the best thing that we can do is just instill all of the lessons we've learned to our kids and hope that they end up being role models and amazing human beings. But if I can take something for them in the future or for anybody else, if I can just move forward and be maybe a beacon and help somebody through a tough time, I would rather do that. And I've always thought about this too with social media, because we had mentioned it, when there's shame. If somebody is attacking you, I don't know who you are, I can take that. And maybe they're not directing that hate towards something else, a family member towards a coworker. So I'll just move past it. And maybe if somebody else sees that somebody's doing that, but I'm still thriving, that'll encourage them also to quiet the voices of shame that are in their heads.
Yeah, that's so good. And also that when people are attacking you, like it's so perfect what you just said. It might be directed towards somebody in their life, because it has to do more with them than you.
100%.
And I think
that is something that I always learned that I wish I knew in high school, is that usually When people attack or they are mean, there is something else rooted. I have one of my best friends who's on the news. Somebody wrote in and said, here are 9 reasons you should go on maternity leave and never come back. And I was like, that was a half an hour of somebody, a stranger, just to post that about another human being. And I was thinking, that says everything that has to do in that commenter's life and nothing about you.
Right. It's
And also
hurt people hurt people.
Right. Hashtag thanks for watching, by the way.
Yes. Yeah. Thanks for your time. And then I think a couple other things. There's a couple more questions. You mentioned very early on in your essay, addiction is a dark disease that can tear people, families, and friends apart. So can you talk a little bit about how your addiction impacted your relationships with your friends and family?
I would say it was a hard struggle, especially when I went to rehab and had to kind of look through the lens of my parents and also my best friends, my family. What I would say is they always loved me. They were always there for me. I was really fortunate to have an amazing support system. My parents lived here in the Phoenix area, so I stayed with them for 3 months. I never thought at 30 I'd be moving back in, but I'm so grateful for that. But I would say is it only strengthened our bond. What I did realize is there were drunk nights and I'd hurt people. And when you sit down and talk to them about that, you think in your head you've only done X, Y, and Z. One of my best friends was like, here's my list of everything that's actually happened. And so ultimately all my relationships strengthened and I didn't realize some of the hurt that I had caused. And that was really a sobering moment. I mean, think about it. It's kind of like having all this clutter in your house and you just throw it in the garage and then you have to sit there and just look at it. You can't just donate the furniture or anything. You have to just look at the mess you've made of your life and how do you make it better. So that's one way I'm really grateful for recovery and for sobriety is just that I feel like everything is strengthened. And I didn't realize how much hurt that I was causing.
And then this is something I experienced. I don't know if I haven't really asked this question to a lot of people, but I wonder if it's universal. Initially, when you knew this is coming out, like now there's no way to hide that I just got a DUI, did you have moments of thinking, how can I spin this to make it not sound so bad?
I think that was an initial option when I was in the cell. So first was a dark moment of reputation and suicide. Next after that was, how can I kind of spin this? I'd convinced myself that I would just go on the news and have 10 minutes to explain to people, which makes no sense and sounds ridiculous in this moment. And that's when I started kind of going down that path that I thought, maybe we can turn this into something positive. But I do think there is a moment where kind of that voice comes into your head and goes, you're justified, your actions were justified. Like, we're gonna enable you to keep going.
Yes. Yeah. I very much so experienced that of like, okay, if I'm going to tell people I had this struggle, let's not make it sound as bad as it really was. Let's try to say, oh, every once in a while I struggled. So, but what I realize is, and speak to this, radical and complete acceptance of the truth is the only way you really get through to feeling healing and wholeness.
100%. So even when I wrote this essay, I said I wanted to give all the details, bad details, dark details. But what was really important to me is only telling it from my perspective, like just what I had experienced. I don't want anyone to think that everything I went through was universal because it was just special to me, but hopefully people can see similarities in the words that I wrote.
It kind of goes back to that, I think initially we grew up in a world where shame, which we all experience in different ways, makes us attach ourselves to different labels that make us feel worthy. And that can be an education, it can be money, it can be fame, it can be having a good body, it can be all sorts of things. The people that you affiliate yourself with, ways that we tell the world, look at me, I'm worthy. And so when you live in this space where you feel like you're chasing, Brene Brown says that you get caught up in this hustle for worthiness, that shame keeps you in a hustle for worthiness. And I very much resonate with that. And so then you're in this hustle for worthiness to have a moment where you break that mold, where you share that you've been addicted to alcohol or struggled with an eating disorder or been a victim to sexual trauma, anything that keeps us ashamed. Those are some of the most terrifying, scary moments I think that you can go through. So there's a couple questions here in this statement, but speak, I guess, first to the fear that you had to walk through to get on the other side of shame.
It was definitely a long process. Like I would say I'm probably at just 5% of shame when it was 100% coming out of jail. But what I relate back to is Glee. I was a huge Glee, love that show. And they all wore t-shirts that just said what their insecurities were. So when I walked out, I thought, you know what, I'm going to own this. I'm going to show the mugshot. I'm going to tell people my story. I'm going to say like what I am struggling with, tell them the whole truth. And even if in that moment they give me shame, that is more on them, not on me, because I believe in sharing my story.
You have that fear that you have to walk through. You realize it's actually better on the other side. But then it's the secondary shame that we kind of talked about to begin with, which is this feeling of like, okay, I'm good now, right? Like I now have to portray to people that I've found healing and I'm going to be good forever. And you speak to that so beautifully. Like you're not preaching down from the mountaintop of like, I found sobriety and now I'm perfect. It's so much this humbleness that you share in this radical acceptance that every day is going to be a new challenge. And I really think that that is key to staying in a good place. So I don't really know what my question is in that.
No, I know where you're going. So
yeah.
When people say they've got this or they're overconfident, especially with addiction, as soon as you've got this, you don't have any. You get this confidence, and that's when I think the voice that's in your head starts saying, well, you've got this, so just have a drink. So it's really important for me just to let people know, like, this is a daily struggle. This is something that can all go away. Think about that. So I have 2 years of a perfect track record right now, but if I have even a sip of wine, all that's erased and goes away. That doesn't mean that it's lost. It was time served. I would have to start again. But think about now that's in your system, and now the voice is saying, well, it wasn't that bad, try again. And then you keep going down the dark hole until a lot faster until your life gets much worse. So for somebody like me, when it's the shame or when I start hearing those voices, it's really important just to talk about it.
Yeah. Okay. And then this is more a question for me. I don't know if I'll use this, but it's interesting. So when I had shared my story, I was working in news and I quit my job shortly after. And I've been talking to a psychologist and I just kind of wonder if there's something there. Did you really think and feel like I need to get out of this? Like, do you ever question that decision? Do you still believe you needed to leave there to get better? Or was there part of you that felt like you had to, I'm going to shut all that down because that's my ego. That's not the real me. I've now found the real me in sharing this vulnerable part of my story. And so I'm going to turn away from everything that must have been false. And it's hard for me because I can look back and I can see how part of me, I think, was chasing some level of worthiness through wanting to be on the news. But that's like the dark, egotistical side. There's the other side that has just always loved people and wanting so badly to share their stories because I believe it can bring goodness to the world. And so I guess I've wrestled with this feeling of like, did I leave my job because, you know, I never went to my boss and said, hey, what do you think if I start a segment sharing stories of shame? That to me felt too scary. I felt like I just needed to quit, say goodbye to it all, and just start from the ground up. Does that make any sense, what I'm saying?
No, 100%.
Okay.
I think in my situation, I wanted to leave news in that moment because the voice of shame was so strong in my head, even at 6 months of sobriety, like I just finished up the sentence in jail. And I knew going back into the newsroom, it was going to be on twofold. It was going to be from viewers. I knew it would be reflected. It was going to be from all of my coworkers who were very in the moment because news travels fast. It was going to be, there was just so many thoughts of like, as soon as I walk in the door to work, I'm going to feel all these eyes of judgment. And that's what led me in the first place to not work on myself and not get better with myself. Mm-hmm. So that's why I said, at least give me a year. And now at 2 years, there might still be some of those feelings, but it was really important for me at the time. And I'm so grateful that they let me out of my contract just to like work on me. And there is a lot of stress that comes with news. And I was working the morning show. So you go to bed at like 8 or 9, you wake up at 3 in the morning. Yeah. And that was a place where I was like, this is just a lot right now. And I really do need to focus on myself.
Yeah. And I think there was a lot of those truths too. Like they let me out of my contract too. And my reasoning was like, and I could feel myself on the verge of a mental breakdown, I think, from working 6 years on a morning show, same thing, having 4 or 5 hours of sleep a night. it was not sustainable. But I think I also felt like it, like you say, those eyes of judgment. Like I knew I was walking into a newsroom. People knew my story, but no one was talking to me about it. And I felt like I needed to talk about it. Like I needed to keep talking about it to stay in a good space, and that those eyes of judgment might be the thing that like pushed me back in. So I'm not saying I regret it, but I guess I'm just saying it's interesting to sometimes see how coming out of shame makes us feel this need to like, I need to get rid of this and maybe go back to it later. I don't know. It's just an interesting little.
That makes a lot of sense. And what
Yeah.
it took me a little bit to realize is the man I am today, I'm proud of him. I can look him in the mirror. I can say, I love you. Let's go make the world a better place. The man I was 2 years ago was the exact opposite. It was somebody I couldn't look myself, my eyes in the mirror. Even when I would put on makeup before live shots, I didn't want to look at myself because I didn't like what I saw. And so if somebody wants to judge me for who I was then, that's totally their right, but it's not the person who I am today.
Yeah, well, that's beautiful. I love your story so
You're
much.
so great. It's so good to connect. I feel like no time has passed. I mean, it's been like a decade.
Seriously.